You're working on a JavaScript project, you may see some errors. You won't see this in HTML and CSS. It's something that only JavaScript will do, and it is actually pretty useful. So I know some of you guys have the preview window open, and the errors will kind of pop up in here. And that is sort of like a replit version of the console, but it's not exactly the same as a console. So that's fine if you use that, but I always recommend having the actual preview window open because it shows you what it'll really look like on a website, and then you can see the console here. So there's a lot of different types of errors that you can get when you're writing JavaScript. One type of error, most of them, almost all of them have to do with basically simple typos. So for example, let's say I forgot to capitalize my name button here. So I have name button with a capital B, and let's say down here I refer to it as name button with a lowercase b. So if I save this and I run it, I'm going to get a little red error like this. If I'm using the web view and I run this, it's going to kind of look like that. So they're similar, but they're slightly different. And these errors are actually really useful because it'll show you exactly where in your code the error comes from. So it says script.js, that's the name of the script file, because you can have more than one script. And then it has the line, 19. And so if we go back to the script file and look for 19, it doesn't solve the error for us, but we can at least see where it is, and then we can try to figure it out. The error will tell you some information, but until you kind of understand more basics of programming, it probably won't make that much sense. But what this means, uncaught reference error, name button is not defined, is basically saying this variable doesn't exist. And you might think, well, of course it exists. I made this variable right here. But it's not the same spelling. It's not the same syntax, and so that's why you're getting an error. So you can rename it here. Although it kind of looks like the AI is telling me what to do here, which is kind of nice. So if I just hover over here, the replit AI thing is popping up and it's saying, could not find name button. Did you mean name button? And actually that's right. But it doesn't give me a button to like change anything. So that's pretty good though. Let's see if maybe if I go to this. No, I don't want to do that. So the AI could help me here potentially. But we really just need to see that this is spelled differently than that. And one thing that can help with that is if you double click on one of your variables, it's going to highlight every instance of that variable. So notice if I double click on get name, it's kind of subtle, but the get name function is actually highlighted. And if I click on that one, it actually highlights that one. So if you double click on this and it doesn't highlight this one, that's another little hint that they're not the same. And then even if you can't see what the syntax error is, you can say, well, I know that and that are supposed to be the same. So I'm just going to copy this and I'll double click this and paste it there. And so that should solve that error. Okay, so now that error is gone. Another error that you might see is if you misspell something in your HTML. So let's say for my name button, I forgot the N. I'm not going to see this error right away. Or actually I am. Okay. So this is a slightly different error. It says uncaught type error cannot read properties of null. Okay, so that is a little bit different, but it's coming from the same issue. So I have this name button thing. It's also from line 19, and I can also click on the script and see it over here in the sources. But let's stay on the console. So this is a slightly different error because now the variable is right. So the variable exists, but what it's pointing to doesn't exist. Because this name button is trying to point to something with the ID name-button, but I forgot the N over here. And so if you see that, if you see cannot read properties of null, that means that the element that we're trying to reference, it can't find. So then we go look in the HTML and we put that in there and we get that. Another error you might see is if I do something like this, if I forget a curly bracket in my function, I get this unexpected end of input error. And that's not very useful because it makes me think that there's something at the bottom of the page that's causing an issue. But that's not actually the case. the reason it's this unexpected end of input is because now what it thinks is happening is that this function has this function inside of it. Because you can put functions in other functions. And so if I don't close the first function, then it thinks that I'm still going with that. And so what it actually thinks I should have is like another bracket down here, which would fix that error, but it would create a new issue. So what I really need is a bracket right here. And let's see if the AI can tell me that. Get place is declared, but value is never read. That's not right. So the AI is not always right. But let's just put a bracket there, and now we'll fix that error. So there are a lot of other errors that you might run into, but those are a few basic ones. And if you see that red, if you see something red and you look at the line and you still don't understand what it means, you can Google it and maybe you'll see a good response, or you can just ask me and I'll take a look at it. All right, so I want to add a couple things into the program, and this will be a good chance to go over a programming concept called a conditional statement. This is a way of making a decision, and it's a very complex concept with lots and lots of different use cases. I'm just going to go over a couple, but there's a lot of different ways to use it. But it's pretty easy to write just a basic one. It's also going to let us go over a little making our code a little bit more complicated. We're going to have one code block inside of another code block. So I'm going to be working on this getName function here. So right now in my program, I'm asking the user to input their name, but if they don't put anything here, it doesn't care. It doesn't know that. And so we can still get to the end of the program and we don't get any errors, but we don't get the result that we want because our user hasn't put anything in here. So what we need to do is add something to check to make sure that they actually put the new content there. And the easiest way to do this, there's different ways to do it, but the easiest way to do it is to add a conditional statement to say, if they put in the content, then we accept the content. And if they didn't put in the content, then we don't accept the content. So we can check for that. So in our getName function, we can check to see if they put something in there. So first we need to get that value. So we're going to say variable name, and we're going to say what did I call this? Name input dot value. So that will give us the value of the name. This is looking weird for some reason. Oh, okay, it's getting ahead of itself. Okay, so we're gonna first check for user input. So we're gonna get the name value, and then we're gonna check if the name value. There's a few different ways we can check it. But in JavaScript, there's a really simple way, which is that if we have something called an empty string, that means there's a value that doesn't have any characters in it. It's going to say that that's not true. So when we use an if statement is another control structure in our code. So this is our conditional statement, and a condition is just like whether or not something is true. Like if it's cold outside, I wear a coat. If it's warm outside, I wear a t-shirt. So if is a condition, and whether that condition is true or false, we make a different choice. So if name, and let's just say there's some input for the name. So if they did put the name, then we're going to move on with the rest of our code. So we say if we put the condition inside these parentheses, and then we have a new code block. This is like our function code block, but it's inside the function. So when I click on this curly bracket, it highlights this curly bracket down here. That's our function code block. Now we have a separate code block inside our function. And I want this code to be in there. So just to do this quickly, I'm just going to delete that, and then I'm just going to move everything over. So this doesn't change the functionality, but it makes it easier to read where the code block starts and ends. So if they did put in a name, we're going to hide the name div. We're going to show the place div. Then, if they didn't put in a name, we can use, whoops, we can use something called else. So after that bracket, we say else, and then we have another code block. So if the name exists, we run the code inside the first block. If the name doesn't exist, then we run the code inside the second block. And so what I'm going to do in the second block is I'm going to say, you know, please input your name. And I could even change the color of the input to red or something like that. So let's try that first. So I'm going to change the color. Maybe I'll change the outline of the input to red. So actually, let me test how to do that in Chrome before I screw it up in JavaScript. So I'm going to look at this input, and if I say border color is red, that seems to work. So I'll use that. So I'll say name input dot border, or I have to say style first. So I'll say style to get the CSS, and then I'll change the border color and set that to red. Notice that border color in JavaScript is a little bit different than border color in CSS. In CSS, I would say border dash color, but JavaScript we can't use dashes because they're used for math. So I'm just going to say style.borderColor equals red. And so now if I don't type this in, it's going to turn red. So that might be enough. Maybe we can say that's good enough there, but we could also add something. We could say, we could add some text in here. What would we say? Like this is required, or please input your name. I'm trying to think. We could add the placeholder. Maybe we'll do that. That's just something that we could add. We could say name input dot placeholder. Placeholder is like text that shows up inside the box. And we could say name is required. Let's see if that works. Yeah, so if I try to go to the next button, we get this name is required, and now I have to type in Owen. If I do type in something here and I go next, it lets me go on to the next part. And so this is a way I can validate user input. So if you ever sign up for Google or log into somewhere and you get your password wrong or you do something, this is one way of checking. We have a conditional statement to say if the password is right, then we log in. If the password is wrong, then we have to give some sort of response to say you've got to fix that. Okay, so we can put that for all of our questions if we want to. And that's basically it. So we have if the name exists, then we move on to our next question. So let's put that here. If name exists or has characters, go to next question. And then if name does not exist, prompt user again. Okay. So that's basically our conditional statement. Another way that we can use a conditional statement is to take our user input and compare it to something. So I'm going to add another question, and then maybe I'll make it a drop down. And based on what the drop down is, maybe I'll give two different answers. So you don't have to do this, but just as an example. So I'm going to go over here just to the HTML for a second. And so I'll kind of go over adding another question, and then I'll also go over another way to do a condition. So let's add another question. So we'll say div ID, and let's give let's give the user a choice here. You don't have to do this in the Mad Libs project. This is sort of more like our Choose Your Own Adventure project, but I just want to use it as an example. And if you want to use it, of course you can. So let's give them a choice. So we're going to get their name and place, and let's ask them if they want to have a coffee or a pizza. So we'll say I'll just call this div ID choice. And I'm going to give them two options so I can compare the options. So I'm going to use a select input for that. So I'm going to say select ID equals, or let's call this choice div to keep the same convention. So choice select. And they're going to have two options. So if option 1 is coffee, option 2 is pizza. You can have more than 2 if you want, but I'm just going to do 2. And then we'll end our select there. And then we'll have a choice button. So I'll say button ID equals choice button. And we'll go to next. So we're going to have to modify some of our JavaScript to include our next choice. And then I also want to hide the choice div at the beginning. Since I added this new HTML, we're going to see this choice here at the beginning. And actually, I need a label here. So I'm going to add a P and say, what would you like to have? And so they'll get to choose. So first thing I want to do is hide this new content. And so I can go to my style.css. And one of the nice things about CSS, you might think, oh, I have to copy and paste this whole rule. But if we're just applying one rule to two areas, I can just put a comma here and write the next area. So I can say div ID choice div. And that will apply that display none to my choice div. And I can do that as many times as I want. I just add a comma after each one, and I can put as many as I want there. Okay, so now we are back to input your name. So then let's go back to our script. We're going to have to get references again to our new div. So I'm going to copy and paste. So remember, if you copy and paste a whole section, be careful with typos. Be careful to replace everything, because that's an easy way to create errors. So each instance of place now becomes choice. I can copy this and paste it in to each one of these. Just be careful. If you missed one, it may not work the way you want it to. So now with so get name goes to get place. That's fine. I'm going to close this here using this little arrow. So then get place, we got to change a little bit, because now we're not going to our response. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy this whole function, because I am going to use some of it. So rather than retyping it, I'm just going to copy and paste. And I'm going to say get choice down here at the bottom. And I'll leave this like it is. I'll probably replace this later. And so let's fix get place. Another thing that you can do that's really useful is if you have some code that you haven't finished yet, if you hit command question mark, it'll add 2 comment slashes at the beginning. And so this code will get ignored. So if I don't want this code to run, I can put a comment there. And then if I hit command question mark or slash again, it'll bring it back. So if you have some code that you're not finished writing yet that's giving you an error, you can just, that's called commenting something out. And you can just do that real quick and move on. Okay, so now we can delete this part because we don't need this response anymore. But now let's update our get place code. So let's add a check in here. So before we hide anything, let's make sure they added a place. So we'll say check for place value. The last time I used a variable to do this, but you don't have to do that. I was just kind of making it clear what the steps are, but I could just check the value itself. So I could check place input.value. That's the same thing as what I did last time, where I saved the name first and then checked if name. I can just put this directly in there. So there's lots of different ways to do stuff. You know, you'll kind of learn them as you go. So if they did put in a value, then we want to hide the previous input as usual. So I'm going to put this here. And then we want to move on to our choice div. So I'm going to say choice div.style.display equals block. And then if they didn't put a place yet, I'm gonna do else here, and I'm gonna do the same thing I did before. I'm just gonna copy and paste this part so I don't have to retype it. So I'm hitting Command C to copy and Command V, and then I just have to make sure to put in the place input instead of the name input. And change this to place is required. Okay, so now I've added this new step, but now I'm gonna see the choice. And so here's a different type of question that I'm gonna add. So we'll see what that looks like in a second, but I think I forgot to add the event. So let's make sure to add the event first. Yeah, here. So I have to say choice button dot add event listener, and we're say get choice. So we have to add an event listener for each one of our buttons. So now the choice is going to be either coffee or pizza, and so we can react to that input using a conditional statement. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm going to go over the way that I would prefer to do it, but you may want to do it different ways. So we are going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a story, and then I'm going to add to that story based on the input. So I'm going to create a new variable called story, and the beginning of the story is just going to say hi, and then I'm going to add the user input dot value, and then I'm going to add a period, or let's put an exclamation point. So that's the first line in my story, and then I can add to the story. So I can say story, and then there's a neat shorthand we can do in coding. So I could say story equals story plus this, where I add more content to the story. But if I want to do that shorthand, I can just say plus equals. So plus equals means take what I already have and add more to it. So I can say hi user input dot value. Let's go to, and I'll say place input dot value, and I'll end this. And then I could just add the choice that they had. So I could say story plus equals. So let's go to, I'm actually going to put a comma here and have a, and then we'll say choice input dot value. So we can get that value without necessarily having to make a choice if we're just saying back to them what they wrote. But if we want to have two different endings to the story based on the input, then we need to use an if statement. So let's test this and see if it works first, and then we'll update it. So now if I try to input my name, it won't let me skip this. So I'm going to say Owen, and then input a place. If I skip this, I get another place is required. So I'm going to say New York, and go to next. And it says, what would you like to have? I'm going to say pizza. Oh, and I got an error. User input is not defined. Okay, I meant to say name input. Whoops. Okay, let's try that again. So that's why having the console open is useful. I saw that error before I realized that something was wrong, so I don't have to like figure out why it's not doing what I want to do. It doesn't always work, but it can be useful. So let's put in my name again, and a place, New York, and let's get a coffee. And I did not, oh, I did it. Sometimes it takes a while to reload. So let's try that one more time. Now I'm getting a different error. Okay. So this says, cannot read properties of null. So I've got something null on line 66. And so my choice input, did I not put a choice input? I have a choice input. Oh, but you know what my problem is that my choice is a select. I'm just going to change this to input. It doesn't have to match the HTML, and I am inputting information. So I'm just going to change that to input. That should fix that. So try this again. Okay, now I'm not getting, I'm clicking next and nothing's happening. So let's see, but I'm not getting an error. So sometimes you don't get an error, but it's just not doing what you think it should do. So let's take a look. So I have choice button here. That looks fine. I have choice button here, choice button here. That looks fine. I have choice button, click, get choice. That also looks fine. Oh, now I understand. So I made the story, but I didn't actually show it to the user. So creating the value is different than printing the value out. So to display the story, we need to uncomment our response. And now I can take out the beginning of this and just put story. So I'm building this story up. Okay, I think now I've made a bunch of mistakes, but I'm getting closer. And now I think this will work. There we go. Hi, Owen. Let's go to New York and have a coffee. Although I didn't hide this. I think I forgot to. I don't know what happened to that. I might have deleted that by mistake. So let's hide our choice div.style.display equals none. Hide the. Okay, so then instead of just displaying the story, let's say we want to have very different endings based on what the user decided. So I'm going to change this to a period, and I'm going to say if choice input.value equals. So in the previous example of using an if statement, what I did is I just said, does the thing exist? And to see if something exists, we just put that thing in the parentheses. So the value of the place input or the name variable that we created. But if we want to compare two values to see if they're the same, we have to do something else. We have to use equal signs. And in JavaScript, since we use a single equal signs to assign values to our variables, we use a double equal sign to compare values. So we need to compare the value that the user input to either coffee. We know that that's one option. Or we can say else. And then we know there's only two options here, so I don't have to say pizza. But I could say else if choice input.value equals pizza. And this is also good if I want to add more options later. So now let's change our story based on what they decided. So I'm going to put a comment here, start creating story, and then change ending depending on input. Okay, so if they got coffee, let's say, let's get a coffee at, where's a good coffee place? Dunkin' Donuts. So now I'm changing more than just the input. I'm actually like adding to the story that's specific. So now it's easier to do this inside of an if statement. So let's get coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. And then if they say pizza, we could say story plus equals, let's get a pizza at Joe's Pizza. Okay, so it's not very exciting, but it shows how we can have a different story. And then I'm just going to take this line out. Then when we get to the end, regardless of what we added here, we're going to display that story. So now, if we reload this, we should be able to see all this in action. So I'm going to put in my name. And I'm going to put in a place. And now if I choose coffee, I should add a, there's no space here because I need to add that into my JavaScript. So I say, hi, Owen, let's go to New York. Let's get a coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. I need to add a space there as well. And then if I do this again, I can say, let's say Brooklyn. And we can get a pizza. and now we have a different sentence at the end. If you want to have spaces, just put a space at the end of your punctuation here. So it looks a little weird, but we need a space before the next sentence. So the easiest way to do that is anytime we have punctuation, we know that something might come after that. So we can just add a space here. This is our last sentence, but you could add a space there as well, because either if you add more to it later, you'll already have that space there, or if you don't, it's just a space, so you won't see it anyway. So let's see that one more time with our spaces. There we go. So now we have some spaces. So now we have all of the components of our Mad Libs game that we need, and we can make different decisions and stuff like that as well. That should be enough to kind of get things moving. I'll go over a couple basic things next week, but that's kind of the main sort of like basic stuff that we have to be able to do. Yeah, next week we'll do a couple more things, maybe with CSS, maybe add some randomness, could be kind of fun. And then we'll also go over submitting the project, which will be very similar to submitting previous projects. And then that'll be our programming topic.
When is this due again?
This is due on the December 1st, I think. Let's check the Blackboard grades. December 4th. So that's 2 Mondays from today. Yeah. Yeah, there should be. Oh, but this I need to update because this is for a different class. I'll update the rubric right now and put it there. Oh, let me stop the